Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
The projectile war continues to rage on. As of recording this podcast, it's been about 20 days since US, Iran, Israel have been embroiled in a projectile war in the West Asian region that has also engulfed other countries in around the Gulf. So, as this plays out, there are a host of developments with wide ramifications also simultaneously unfolding domestically within the US. One such development is the resignation of a senior counterterrorism official, Joseph Kent, very recently, in which he has criticized the US decision to go to war with Iran. To discuss what this means for US domestic politics, for the Make America Great Again MAGA world, and other stakeholders, I have with me Abhishek from Takshashila, who closely follows US domestic developments. And I'm Lokendra. I'm with the High-Tech Geopolitics Program with Takshashila. So before I, hand it over to you, Abhishek, maybe just a few words about what happened with this resignation, right? So Joseph Kent essentially said that this was not the right decision to enter into the war. He criticized Israel also for this, I think, to some extent. And he's someone who has been, this particular person, who has been part of the MAGA world in a way, part of Trump's orbit. But in the past, I think Joseph Kent has taken some anti-interventionist positions and supported how Trump dealt with foreign policy in a way that didn't get US embroiled into foreign conflicts. And Joseph Kent has also been in the military, in the armed forces. He has had his wife, I think, was killed in action in West Asia. So he comes with those credentials. And for him to resign and then put the administration on spot, that says something about the ruptures happening within the MAGA world. Then you also have the famous podcaster, Tucker Carlson, right? Who has broken ranks in a way and is, I think, releasing things, saying things against the ongoing war. And he's very critical of it. And I'm sure there must be other MAGA figures because for the last many years, I think close to a decade now, this movement has been persistently saying, let's not get into more wars that run forever. US has been in Iraq, in Afghanistan, they've been stuck there. Let's not get stuck anywhere else. And some of the things that they've been saying look more like isolationist, right? They want US to focus more on the enemies within rather than the enemies across oceans, broadly. So, Abhishek, the question to you is, when you read this announcement or the news of the resignation of Joseph Kent, what was your initial impression? And what do you think this resignation represents?
So, firstly, thank you for having me, Lokendra. It's always a pleasure having these discussions with you. So, regarding Joe Kent, I think his profile is very similar to all the major figures within the MAGA world right now, right? He comes from a conservative background, he comes from a military background as well. He has been someone who has supported Trump, for which one of the reasons has always been that Trump will not get me into more wars. This has been the slogan regarding in relation to the Trump campaign and Trump supporters since the starting of his campaign, and it basically comes from his track record from 2019, is when his term ended, that he did not actively get U.S. troops involved in any of the wars, unlike all the other presidents. Now, in that sense, if we look at Joe Kent's allegations regarding Israel, these are nothing new within the MAGA world. We had seen Marco Rubio also have similar opinions initially, which he obviously later on corrected. And many members of the administration have repeatedly discussed this kind of opinion that Israel is in some way forcing the US's hand. And dragging it along into this war with Iran, right? And most of these people have traditionally opposed what they call entering a quagmire with Iran. That is the endless war, which results in killing of many people. So I think my first thoughts in that direction were that yes, Joe Kent, as the director of National Counterterrorism Center, is an important figure within the MAGA world, but he's nowhere in what we call the close circle of President Trump, because President Trump himself, when asked about the resignation, mentioned about how he did not know Kent as much as personally as he would like, but opposed his view that Iran did not pose any immediate threat to the US. So I think, but another interesting point I also noticed here was that President Trump did not in any way oppose the statement that it was Israel that dragged the US into this conflict. He only opposed the fact that Iran was an immediate threat to the US. This comes in the light of also the fact that several people in the administration initially claimed that the reason why they had to join Israel's offensive was that they expected a major retaliation from the Iranians that focused on the destruction of US bases in the neighboring countries of Iran. And if US had not joined the attack, US would either way be victim of the attack. This was the larger framing that was given. And I think that framing resonated well within the Trump supporters of the MAGA world. Although there is speculation that there is a growing split, a majority of MAGA supporters, according to some polls, 9 out of 10 out of them support Trump's actions in Iran. And I think this kind of framing that Iran did pose immediate threat to US bases, US soldiers in the region was something that worked out for them there.
So, what I understand from your response, Abhishek, is that MAGA world is split, but the split is not very stark, as in there might be a vocal minority within the MAGA base that is against getting into a war with Iran, but there is a sizable chunk that is okay with the ongoing projectile war. Is that a correct way to?
Yes, in fact, a majority of them are more than a majority.
And this is based on polls that have been conducted?
Yes, it is YouGov poll, the NBC poll, and several private, smaller scale polls that have also been conducted, which target, specific MAGA states. So most of these polls have come out, and most of them show that overwhelming number of MAGA supporters and a majority of Republicans as well. They support this campaign, and most of these MAGA people, they're self-described MAGA supporters, obviously, because they can't register for a MAGA vote. But I think the larger context is what resonates with them here, right? Because MAGA has traditionally been that isolationist, but we have also seen whenever we see these major figures like be it Joe Kent, be it Tucker Carlson, be it Marjorie Taylor Greene, be it several other important people from the Trump administration close to Trump, who have openly opposed him in some way or the other in relation to this invasion, I think they are placing some kind of a long-term bet because of what they saw with Iraq. With Iraq, what happened was initially people who did not support the invasion, they were seen as some kind of traitors because they were not rallying around the flag when the need was the highest and all of that. But in the long term, in a couple of years of US entering Iraq, these people were hailed as heroes. People like Bernie Sanders, especially, they were hailed as heroes who had that sense to understand that Iraq was not the US thing to get into. So I think here what we are seeing is the 10-90 split somewhere. And the 10 is what we can safely consider the MAGA elite, the people who have been close to the administration, who have been active in politics in some way or the other. These people probably see somewhere in which opposing Iran, this particular offensive since the start, would gain them some kind of legitimacy in the long term, although it might cost them some kind of conflict with Trump and related MAGA loyalty. They might lose, they might be viewed as MAGA traitors, as we see in the case of Tucker Carlson in the short term. But probably in the long term, they very strongly hope for this to play out in their favor, wherein they gain additional legitimacy by opposing the war and not rallying around around the flag, as they say.
That's a very interesting argument, Abhishek. Interesting point. The idea that some of these actors are playing the long game. I think one actor which we have not discussed so far, who is playing a really, really nice long game, is the vice president of US, right? So Vance, the VP, has been on the sidelines, I would say, in the broader sense, when the Venezuelan action happened and when the Iran thing is unfolding, right? You see Pete Hegseth, you even see Marco Rubio, and in the Venezuelan one, Marco Rubio was in the forefront in some ways, and now you see Pete Hegseth being on the forefront in many ways. And JD Vance is someone who has, I think, addressed or spoken about these things to some extent over the last few weeks, maybe tried to defend the administration actions, but has largely refrained from attaching too much of his image, of his own standing or whatever to these developments. And I think one reason is that JD Vance is also playing a long game. It is possible, and we have had a history of US getting involved in forever wars or wars that are not really addressing US national security in the long term and things like that, cost wise, destruction wise, deaths wise, everywhere. Just huge death and damage is being caused in so many regions where US got involved. And later on, politicians from the same party that had earlier launched a war or been involved in a war then derided the decisions to go to war or be involved in war. From Vietnam to Iraq to Afghanistan, we've seen that. So there's a tendency to call out past wars and say, oh, those are mistakes or those are not required. Unnecessary cost, unnecessary death and destruction was caused. And JD Vance is someone who has been speaking about non-intervention, focusing on US and things like that. And he understands that after Trump, the Republican Party would need someone to lead them, right? And the after Trump question is something that a lot of Republicans think about. Even US politics in general is something that they're thinking about. So maybe the bet JD Vance is placing here is, in future, if required, he should be able to distance himself from both Venezuela and Iran and say, look, folks, I tried my best. He will say something like this, right? I tried my best to tell this administration not do it, to not, go to war with Iran, with Venezuela, to try out different approaches. But there were hardliners within the administration. And once they went all in, the best I could do is to reduce the level of intervention. I could push for the wars be less. This thing. I mean, the US be involved in as minimum way as possible, even if it has to get involved at all, right? And then what Vance can do is he can twist his statements from this year, like 2026, and play out the give a spin to all these statements and try to distance himself from the actions of the current administration. How much successful that would be, we don't know, because he is a core member of the administration. He's a core member of Trump's inner circle, so on and so forth. So, but still, I think it is possible that he's also playing this long game. And same with others that you are saying, right? It is possible that 4 or 5 years down the line, some of these people who resigned or who protested, went against the mainstream MAGA voices and things like that, would be, you know, rehabilitated in some way, or would be worshipped in some way, or would be appreciated in some way, so on and so forth. So that is definitely possible. With that, I want to pivot, Abhishek, this discussion towards US politics more broadly, not just MAGA. And I want to talk about the midterm elections that are going to happen. Now, when I read New York Times, when I read other newspapers from across the world, or when I hear experts in India, whenever they're thinking about what Trump is up to, one line is always added in last few weeks that, okay, midterms are around the corner. Somehow a linkage is made that, you know, as if midterm is going to play some role in maybe affecting how Trump does things or affecting his fortunes. So, for the benefit of our listeners, can you tell us what these midterm elections are about? How do they affect the power equations within US? How do they, do they curtail, or do you see signs that they'll boost Trump's powers? How does the Democrat Republican balance currently look like in US Congress, and what it would get, likely to get rather, after the midterm elections?
So I think there are two broad questions here. First is about JD Vance. Your observations are completely right. And since we are discussing vice presidents and since we are discussing Iran, I would like to bring up the Iran Contra scandal. So Iran Contra scandal was a scandal that happened during the Reagan era. His final year basically. The scandal basically involved how CIA. It gave money to Iranians in some way for supporting another anti-communist group in some other part of the world in Latin America, and it was a huge scandal that way, for which the person who had the CIA experience, the vice president of the time, Bush, was blamed for it. And Bush had to endure these questions, and he spent a majority of his campaign, for which he won, fighting these allegations about Iran Contra. So I think that gives us an understanding of the kind of price that vice presidents pay for the actions of their presidents, right? And that is where JD Vance's long game is unique as compared to the long game of someone like, say, Marco Rubio. Because in Trump's latest address to the Congress, the State of the Union, there was a stark moment where he mentions and gives a lot of praise to the work that has been done by Marco Rubio over the year. And this was seen as a signal for both the Republican Party and the Democrats from Trump, signaling the person next in line behind him, the person who he trusts as Marco Rubio, right? And if we look at the wars in general, they are clearly categorized as pro-war hawks that who are called. These people being Marco Rubio, and these people being also Pete Hegseth. And anti-war person are Doe from the start, who is JD Vance. This is clearly established since the Venezuela campaign. Now, Vance could have looked at what other politicians would have looked at, which is the polls, the immediate polls that are coming out, and decide his stance based on that. But Vance did not choose to do that, especially in the case of Venezuela, wherein initially the reactions were mixed, but immediately after the arrest of Maduro and the announcement of the new leader, his replacement, and when there was a major turn within the polls, where most of the people started, especially the Republicans and independents, were okay kind of with whatever happened in Venezuela. A lot of them did not hold any particular opinion on what happened in Venezuela. So I think this might have hinted for someone like Vance to change his stance, but he kind of did not do that. He stuck to his anti-war stance, and he still continues to do so in the case of Iran as well. And if you look at Iran, we have obviously Pete Hegseth, Rubio, Jared Kushner, Witkoff. These people are considered more pro-war people in militarily engaging Iran. And J.D. Vance has been extremely quiet about this. He has not made any public statement opposing the war directly, but his silence is something that is being noted. So in the long game, when Trump will be blamed for Iran, if this campaign is a complete disaster in the months that go forward, if Trump is entirely blamed for it, anyone who Trump supports will also become radioactive. So that is something that J.D. Vance has probably kept in mind
And I think
that influences stance.
what history also tells us to some extent is that vice presidents have all often struggled to disown whatever their presidents did.
Absolutely.
Right? Kamala Harris is a recent example of that. But again, Abhishek, I'm drawing you towards the midterms.
Midterms, yes.
What is the significance of midterms?
So, significance of midterms, as explained very well by Trump himself, is that they will impeach him. That is what Trump said.
Okay.
But I personally feel it will depend on multiple factors. The primary factor being if the Democrat voters they end up electing more progressive candidates, we can see a very strong movement that will lead to Trump's impeachment and Trump's removal from the office. And this is a more likely outcome considering the elections of New York, which we had seen, which had led to the election of a progressive candidate. And similarly, many elections across the US have seen a sort of democratic resurgence, especially in red states like Texas, where several elections have seen election of Democrat candidates, and Democrats have improved 5 points according to the latest polls in after the war had begun. So I think Democrats, in that sense, have a decent chance. But the issue with this point is also regarding the MAGA voters, right? Because if we consider MAGA voters as about 50% of the larger Republican fold, or the 50% voters contributing to what led to the Trump coalition, even if 10% of them withdraw, that is an overall reduction of 5%, and there is an overall decline in approval rating of Trump, his popular vote scale would fall into the 40s from the 50s, the comfortable 50s that he was in. So I think that is where the independents and the moderates of the Republican Party would play an important role. And I think after the Iran invasion, this particular segment that has led to Trump's victory in the 2024 elections has slowly declined. So that is a major important factor to consider.
So basically, the midterm elections have all the potential, based on whatever we are observing right now, to change domestic power equations within the US, which in turn has all the potential to impact whatever US is doing, not just domestically with their immigration agenda and so on, but also their foreign policy and things like that. Because even on Ukraine, on Europe, on Iran, there are so much divergences within US right now that a midterm that goes bad for Republicans and goes good for Democrats can change things quite a lot.
In terms of foreign policy, and if we specifically talk in relation to a country like India, I particularly think that Trump has burnt a lot of bridges, which will be really tough for the coming administrations to fix. Any presidents that come after this, they will have a very tough time in rebuilding that kind of trust. And I think that is the importance of the Trump years, right? that it doesn't revolve around one man in of itself. It is a accumulation of what US has been doing, the mistrust US has been garnering over the years, both domestically as a federal government, and both internationally as an international superpower or hegemon, which it was before. So I think Trump is just a spark or a landing point for all of what has been going on over the years in relation to the US. So I think either way, there will be the foreign policy would be largely consistent with what's going on with Trump right now, with anyone who comes in the future, with probably a slight exception of the stance they might take in relation to Ukraine.
Ukraine and Europe,
Yeah.
maybe India, and maybe vis-a-vis. I mean, I can think even with China, the approach might be different because during Biden years, things were a bit different. So it is possible. I mean, we can debate this in a different podcast of what would change after Trump. For me, I think the larger takeaway from this conversation is that as the Iran war will continue to rage, we may see potentially more fissures in the MAGA movement. Maybe the dissenters are small in numbers now, but they may garner more support going forward. It is possible. And how will that impact the projectile war is something to watch out for. Thank you so much, everyone who has joined in to listen to us. If you have any thoughts, please feel free to reach out to Takshashila Institution. Thank you. Thank you, Abhishek.
Thank you, Lokendra.
If you liked our show, dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs. Check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.